You know, I had a boss who used to say to those of us who wouldn't stop talking about the good old days, "You guys suffer from an excess of past." But then there were those unsufferable 20-year-olds who worked with us who were in the habit of becoming instant fanboys of the next thing that wasn't even out yet. When said thing got announced for the first time, they would go out and browse every piece of media that got released on the thing, they would sign up to the thing's Discord, comb every Reddit that got made on the thing, and flooded Twitter with posts on the thing. They were the kind of people who would have 600 fucking hours in a game that wasn't even out of early access yet. And to those people, my boss would say, "You kids suffer from an excess of future. But you guys are something else. You guys suffer from both of these things at the same time. You go from the nostalgia of the good old days of the Infinity Engine games and the original Fallout, to the anxiety of the next early access game that can't come out soon enough. It's 50%, they don't make them like they used to anymore, and 50%, Alex, when are you going to make a review of this game that isn't even out yet? Guys, how about we live in the time being for the time being? How about we enjoy some of the stuff that's actually out there that is worth playing? In the last video I told you about the 4 RPGs that came out in the year 2024 that didn't quite do it for me. Link in the description, by the way. Well, now's the time for me to tell you about 4 RPGs that came out this year that are very much doing it for me. And I say doing it as in present continuous because I am not done playing any of them. So they can still go downhill or they can become a solid recommendation, which they aren't yet, keep that in mind. But at least 2 of them are very strong candidates to get their own video further down the line. You know, 1 hour long with all the categories and numbers. But for this video, I just want to put them on your radar if they aren't already. So without further ado, here are 4 RPGs that came out in the year 2024 that met or surpassed my expectations, from the ones I've liked the most to the ones I've liked the least. Dustland Delivery. Mad Max and Vagrus had a child, and it's called Dustland Delivery, and you are in the driver's seat of the experience. Get it? Because it's a truck. And you drive it? No?
Hey everybody, an old man's talking!
Dustland Delivery is a sandbox RPG that sits somewhere in between Star Traders Frontiers, Wartales, and Vagrus. And while it's not necessarily better than any of these titles, it does scratch many of the itches that these other games don't. For starters, it's a sandbox RPG in which quests are not only a very important part of the experience, but also very good, surprisingly so in fact. And they are good because the writing is good. It's lean, clever, to the point, and more importantly, unpretentious. And it's all of these things without sacrificing its personality or the immersion aspect of the experience. Dustland Delivery does not have cinematic production values, as you probably can tell by looking at the footage, and there's also no voice acting. What it does have is very concise text snippets with bits of narration, description, and dialogue that convey all the information that you need at any given time. Whether it's a conversation, a short description of a character's facial expression, a subtle hint about maybe the way in which a character pronounces a certain word, or anything else that you might need to get the complete picture of what's going on and where, and what the people involved are like. And you can also tell when there's something fishy going on, or when someone isn't quite on the up and up. And having this information makes your decisions story-wise feel incredibly gratifying. And yes, making decisions is a thing in this game, and your decisions can be quite impactful. Sometimes their impact goes even beyond the outcome of the quest itself. Take for example this quest about a girl who's immune to the virus that's turning everyone into zombies. Huh, where have I heard this before? Anyway,
Massive spoilers coming your way.
The researchers who are investigating the zombie virus ask you to take the girl to a certain facility, but something's fishy about this crowd and there's clearly something they aren't telling you. If you poke around and ask the right questions to the right people, you'll find out that these guys want to go full Marlene on your girl. but this time you are not going through the motions of a heavily scripted game in which you have zero choice in the matter. This time you are playing an RPG. Something about the description of the place seems a little bit off. So you can go with her into the facility, listen to what the Marlens have to say, and then say, okay, cool, take your money and leave and go on with your life as if nothing had happened. Or you can go full Joel and say, over my dead body, bitches. Take the girl, get the hell out of there, and kill everyone who stands in your way in the process. You can also choose to tell the girl the truth about the the revolutionary militia group that started all of this in the first place.
Swear to me that everything that you said about the Fireflies is true.
Which is a choice that you didn't have in that other game, by the way. If you do all of this, later on in the game you can have the girl work at the procurement agency of your village, because child labor is tight. Or you can have her tag along for the ride and expose her to the perils of the road, which include but are not limited to biker gangs, terrorists, zombies, and radiation. And you can also have her take turns at driving the lorry, because child labor good, Prime Minister of Malaysia bad. Just don't give her any liquor, because that is completely unthinkable and off the table. I like that none of the quests in this game feel fetch questy, because they all tell you more about the world, its people, or the world-ending event that everyone refers to as the Fall, or the world that existed before that. And also, there's usually something big at stake with these quests, and it's often something that affects your party directly. I'm also quite impressed at how they managed to make situations feel tense or desperate or just plain hilarious and badass at the same time, which is another thing that I like about this game. It doesn't take itself too seriously. You can clearly tell that the devs were having a blast while making Dustland Delivery, and as a consequence, so did I while I was playing it. And there are a lot of nods to, well, us. When you cheese the hell out of a tight situation with your truck, the game says you bravely ran away. When you talk to a shady weapon dealer, he says, I got lots of guns. And that's just two of many little Easter eggy nostalgia pearls that are hidden away within this title. Now, if I talk so much about quests in this game, which is supposed to be a sandbox RPG, it's because I decided to make those the turnstone of my experience, because I am a story guy. But you can make your playthrough about something else entirely. When I say that Dustland Delivery scratches many itches that other bigger and arguably better games don't, I mean it. Subscriber Leo404 said that while he did enjoy Star Traders Frontiers, he also felt like the game fell a little bit short of his expectations as a sandbox experience. He specifically mentioned that he would have liked to be able to conquer and customize his own planet. And I get it. And well, this is something that you can do in Dustland Delivery. You can find abandoned cities and villages and restore them to their pre-fall glory, whatever that was. I for one have never been much of a city builder guy, but having a stronghold in an RPG is tight. And Dustland Delivery sits just in that sweet spot where all the moving parts of the city building aspect of the game are numerous enough to make it feel complex and challenging, but not enough to make it overly complicated and frustrating. I am usually not crazy about long-term slow burn mechanics, but when I do have them in a game, and I am more or less expected to engage with them, I always like to have some form of early victory. And getting your stronghold up and running as a temporary free shelter and getting it to produce some water is a fairly simple task that you can achieve with relatively low effort. From then on out, you can progressively restore its farms and factories and start producing your own goods, which you can then trade with other cities. You just need to procure enough building materials to rebuild facilities and the right personnel to run each of them. I know that Major Maniac, a regular Discord channel dweller, has gone further down the city management path, and he's even established trading routes and agreements. And I understand that the game gets a little bit micromanagement intensive once you go down that path. But because I've leaned more heavily into the Mad Max experience, I haven't suffered any of these issues myself, so I wouldn't know. And that should tell you all you need to know about the game's flexibility. What I do know, however, is that you can't neglect your city's security, because when your town starts to get notoriety, it will attract the attention of some of the most unsavory types in the wasteland. A crowbar to the head is the best solution for the zombies and terrorists who come to your town to fuck things over every once in a while. and there is a recipe that you can learn to make one. In fact, there are recipes for all manners of weapons, truck upgrades, clothes, etc. And having a crafting specialist in your crew will not only increase the likelihood of you crafting a weapon successfully, it will also improve your chances of creating higher quality items. And there's a big difference between a standard, an advanced, and a legendary crowbar, for example. And this is something that you have to pay attention to in Dustland Delivery, because you want to have the best items that you can possibly craft at all times. And this includes weapons and equipment for your party members and your lorry. But having the best items all by itself won't be enough. You also need the right personnel taking care of things. Take for example that security duty we were just talking about. You want to equip the person in charge of your city security with the best version of the best gun you can craft, the best melee weapon, and the best combat-oriented gear possible in every equipment slot. And an attack dog too, if you can. But you also want that person to have a very high attack score. You may also want to have someone with that same build aboard your lorry, because getting ambushed by zombies and biker gangs is a very common occurrence in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. And speaking of builds, the game offers a pretty robust character creation and progression system. At the beginning of the game, you get to choose your lorry from an assortment of options that have significantly different stats. You can't choose whether you want to go with a pre-made character or a custom-made one, and if you choose the latter, you can buy some initial equipment and supplies, and you can choose initial relation modifiers with the various factions of the game. More importantly, you can allocate attribute points to the various skills that you have in the game, and you can acquire a series of positive and negative traits to further customize your character. I'm probably going to go into further detail when I make a full video about the game, which is very likely going to happen. But one thing that I don't like about Dustland Delivery's character progression system is that choosing to go all in with a certain attribute does not guarantee that you're going to pass the checks that are related to it. In the original Fallout games, for example, if you focused hard on the 2 or 3 skills that you wanted to be good at and the stats that governed them, you could be pretty sure that you were going to succeed at most of the game's challenges that had to do with those skills. But like I said, that's a different story to be told at a different time. But let's talk about the one aspect in which Dustland Delivery outdoes its peers. To me, it's the feeling of adventure that this title is capable of delivering. Don't get me wrong, Wartales and Vagrus both rank very high in the feeling of adventure factor in the sandbox RPG league, but Dustland Delivery is just next level. You are about to go out on a trip from Valleyville to BD City. You're delivering a cargo of goods worth several $1,000s, and your fee is to be paid on delivery. You have 4 days and a comfortable amount of fuel, food, and water. You have been upgrading your lorry, but it's not optimized for every terrain and weather circumstance, but you should be alright. You walk about the city to stretch your legs for the last time before you get going. You chat up some folks at the pub to catch the latest gossip. You restock your spare tires, you listen to some street performers to get that stress level down, and you embark upon the adventure. Dust storms prove to be a pain in the ass all the way through, and the hilly roads are a bit more complicated than you had anticipated, but it's nothing you can't deal with. On the second day, however, you start to worry about how much of a toll these dust storms have taken on your fuel supplies. They have been stalling you quite a bit more than you expected, so you decide to make your rest and meal breaks coincide with the moments when the storms are at their worst, until you realize that they are always at their worst. You still have 2 days to get to your destination, so you should be able to make it without too much trouble, because you are a little bit more than 800 miles away. But the dust storms seem to be getting more intense and frequent, and your fuel supply has gone down to a point in which it's no longer viable to attempt to make a trip back. You also notice that you're not the only one who's beginning to worry. Your companions are visibly stressed and unhappy about the situation because they understand that bad weather and tricky roads are not the only problems you have. You are being forced to take progressively longer rests in areas that are known for not being the safest, and at some point the storms get so bad that your lorry's engine is just not up for the task, and you also can't see jack shit. You are forced to set up camp for the remainder of the day. Everyone's on edge because it's a highly radiated area, and the infected are known to dwell in these parts. You cook, you eat, you share stories with your companions by the fire, and you get hot and steamy with your girlfriend when you get the chance. You feel the stress dissipate after your little sexy escapade, but you can also tell that your other companion, who has also been secretly craving some hot steamy action herself, is visibly more stressed now than she was before, because she knows that you've been naughty and she wasn't on the receiving end of it. You try to console her, but become more stressed yourself in the process. You take a look at your watch, you realize that you've wasted an entire day waiting out the storm, and that you can't go back to Valleyville because you don't have enough fuel, food, or water to make the trip. You're desperately counting on completing that delivery because if you fail, it's gonna be game over for you. But you don't get the chance to ponder upon these things for long because you're jumped by an all-star zombie horde in the middle of the night. You don't know if it's the anger that your other companion had accumulated for not being on the receiving end of your nightly passion, or if it's her natural affinity for violence and firearms, but she viciously takes to the task of shooting up some serious zombie ass. She makes short work of some of them, but a few still manage to close in on your truck. Holy fuck, you're out of ammo. So you resort to your legendary bat, which is legendary for a reason. The problem is that you are about as good at using your bat as Disney is at using the Star Wars IP.
Put a ticket in and make a name and gay!
But just as you are getting used to the idea of becoming just another extra on Michael Jackson's Thriller video, out of nowhere your truck's engine decides to be a team player despite the hideous weather, and you bravely run away by the skin of your teeth again. After a few hours, the storm wanes and you put the pedal to the metal to finally arrive at BD City, with no food, water, or fuel to spare. And you spend the last of your hard-earned cash bribing the guards because the city is under the protection of a faction who hates you. But you make it inside, complete the delivery, and get the much-needed precious cash with which you buy food, water, supplies, and more trading goods. And that's it. That's a semi-regular day on the road in Dustland Delivery. It may not be the fight against the Orphan of Kos and Bloodborne or the final level of Battletoads, but may lightning strike me twice where I stand if this shit's not as intense as those other experiences. Now I could go on to talk about how crafting weapons and upgrades for your lorry is one of the most gratifying experiences that I've ever had in a game. One that not only elevates the quality of Dustland Delivery's main gameplay cycle, but is also designed in a way that provides early victories and a little something extra to keep you interested in crafting mechanics all the way through. Or I could get into the specifics of some of the other quests or the city management aspect of the game, but the more I talk about this clever little title, the more I want to make a full video about it, getting into all the details. For now, I think it's enough to say that this game, which I got for $3.58 when it first came out, and currently goes for $4.49 in my region, pretty much beat the crap out of my every expectation in the best possible way. It may not be the best game of the year, or even the best game on this list, but it has certainly been the most pleasant surprise of 2024, and that's why it gets a solid top spot on this list. Alaloth, Champions of the Four Kingdoms. So Alaloth came out just a couple of weeks or 3 ago. Then why does it feel like it's been around forever? Well, maybe because that's the amount of time it seems to have spent in the production hell of early access. Now, if you are an isometric ARPG guy or gal, and this game wasn't already on your radar, it may be due to one or several of the following reasons. A. You are a mainstream dweller with narrow interest who only knows or cares about the latest Diablo or the latest Path of Exile, and those are the only two games you ever play these days. And any game that is not those two is, quote-unquote, not your style of game. Or B, you did check Alaloth out while it was on early access and decided that the combat was a little too clunky or maybe much too Dark Soulsy for you, and you don't want to have anything to do with anything that's even remotely akin to Dark Souls or any of its multiple clones. So you archived the title in some dark remote corner of your mind and never went back to it. Or C, you don't have time to go out on a quest to find the perfect game for you. You are too old for that, or you have family, a job and responsibilities, or you simply aren't that nitpicky. So your options are limited to those games that make the effort to reach out to you. which of course narrows down the spectrum of games that you do know about to those games whose publishers have big enough marketing budgets to engage in aggressive multi-channel push marketing strategies. And sadly, the publishers of Alaloth fall outside the spectrum of companies that can't afford to do this. Whatever the case may be, know this. Alaloth is a pretty good RPG that blends a series of different mechanics and influences and distills them into a flavor of its own. And the devs were careful and clever not to go too far down any path that only die-hard fans of any of the game's individual influences would care to travel. Combat mechanics, for example, include timed dodge, dash, and parry moves, but the game doesn't feel like a Souls-like. Story, lore, and questing are important in this game, but they never steal the spotlight from the combat. These elements are there to provide stakes and good reasons for you to go out there and kill stuff, or to take a break from killing stuff, which is also good. And loot is important, of course, but it's not the be-all end-all goal that it usually is in the ARPG genre. Now, while there are a couple of things that I don't like about the game, I think that the devs nailed what they were going for the most part. But I can see many of you having a problem with what they were going for in the first place. I can see the isometric hack-and-slash ARPG crowd, for example, not liking the combat one bit. I can see them not liking the fact that you don't have a talent tree with synergies like you do in Diablo-like games. I can see the CRPG crowd rolling their eyes with the story and saying that the game only has surface-level lore and basic interactions with the NPCs, that companions could have been a lot more fleshed out, and that the game's many cities, towns, and ports all amount to one big wasted opportunity. I can see some of you saying that you'd hope the game had more emergent gameplay and survival elements. And I can see the Dark Souls crowd getting bored with all the non-combat stuff that you have to do in the game and dropping out halfway through. So far, I can only say that I would gladly trade some of the game's fighting areas for greater depth and more features and mechanics. The best dungeons in the game have puzzles, traps that you need to sort out, boss battles, hidden rooms, and a few extra mechanics. The problem is that only a handful of fighting areas feature all of these things, and even the ones that do feel a little bit too short. I also wish there had been fewer NPCs and quests, but more ways to interact with them in more meaningful ways. Ways that could have made some of the choices that you make at the character creation screen carry a little bit more weight than they do. But what can I say? I for one am thrilled to see Alaloth's unique blend of mechanics working as an enjoyable, cohesive whole. I feel like I am enjoying the thrill of real-time combat without having to suffer through the endless frustration of failing time and time again because I did not get the timing of that one parry or that one dodge roll right. I feel like I'm finally playing a game that takes place in a medieval fantasy world that draws inspiration from the classics and does so with taste, without feeling cheap or overly tropey. And finally, I feel like I am playing an RPG in which I don't simply steamroll my way past endless hordes of disposable trash mobs that blow up like loot piñatas. There is indeed more to Alaloth than mechanics that we have already seen in other games mixed up in new interesting ways. This game brings to the table features that take the ARPG experience to new grounds, and it also reworks obscure concepts that never took off because they were clumsily implemented in the games that first introduced them into something awesome. The map in Alaloth is one of the best maps that I've seen in an RPG. It's the very best map that I've seen in an ARPG, that's for sure. First, I just can't wrap my head around how massive it is. It's filled to the brim with cities, towns, ports, dungeons, and shrines, amongst many other things. Hell, I've been playing for roughly 25 hours by now, and I've only seen a third of it roughly, and I've only been to 2 of the 4 major cities in the game. Also, we're not talking about your typical copy-pasta or procedurally generated towns that you explore by clicking on the icons on top of buildings. We're talking about big places with taverns, stables, piers, markets with various vendors, blacksmiths, unique landmarks. It's insane. The map also reminds me of the map in Storm of Sahir, which is my favorite map in any RPG. Your party of adventurers is not the only party that's out there doing its thing. There are merchants, group of monsters that need killing, quest-related NPCs, other champions, etc. And some of them will chase after you if you come close enough. I like that there are many bounties and other types of quests that involve combat that don't require you to go into a dungeon, because you want to have something to do while you digest the main course of the game, which is definitely the dungeons. Alaloth Champions of the Four Kingdoms is not perfect though, not by a long shot. Dashing out of enemy attacks in narrow spaces can still be a pain in the ass, though not as much as it was during the early access period. On the narrative end of things, the game does itself a great disservice with an incredibly tropey introduction, and the main premise of the story is as cliché as it gets. Even if it has been fleshed out and seasoned with personal quests and stories about how regular folk and noblemen alike are dealing with the great threat that's looming in the horizon, skills and talents are a little bit lacking in the synergy department. Many of the game's secondary features are pretty useless, and like I said, I would trade some of the game's dungeons and NPCs for a little bit more depth. But these are things that I am eager to tell you about in a full-length video, because I think Alaloth deserves it. For now, it just gets a spot on this list of RPGs that are doing it for me, because I have been thoroughly entertained with it, and I really think this is a game that deserves to be on your radar. Wantless, Solace at the World's End. Wantless is a tactical RPG that has turn-based combat mechanics and takes place in a dystopian future in which people are in the habit of hiring transponsors, doctors of sorts who have the ability to get into their patients' minds to remove fears, bad memories, and even some personality flaws. Think the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, only edgy and pretentious. But then again, it's a French game after all, so it's par for the course. While the word craft isn't particularly sophisticated, sometimes it's even crude, the premise of the story is interesting enough to hold the game's weight all the way through. The writing is sometimes on the nose, but most of the times it lets you piece together what's going on. Nothing terrible or great. But in this game, story and lore are not what you pay the price of the admission for. The more than reasonable price, I might add. Seriously guys, this is a steal of a deal, even if it's at the expense of French taxpayers.
Thank you, dickheads!
What you do pay the price of the admission for is the game's clever design and its incredible mechanics, and there's a shitload of them in this game, believe me. But if you want tactical depth, having a wide array of options at your disposal to put together your character's build with complete freedom, and a serious tactical challenge, and to put your creation to the ultimate test, I really can't think of many games that do a better job than Wantless. And I'm not even exaggerating. Wantless's gameplay cycle revolves heavily around combat and prepping for combat scenarios. These scenarios take place inside your patient's mind, and they consist of a series of combat areas, both mandatory and optional, that require you to accomplish a series of goals, one of which is usually to eliminate all the enemies in the area. In order to accomplish said goals, you have to sneak about, make sure to stay out of the line of sight of pesky snipers while you find a way to close in on them, find your way around random obstacles like floating floor tiles and pools of acid, mind the on-death effects that some enemies have, deal with floor is lava types of situation, make sure you don't get overwhelmed by enemy summons, and use your own combat skills and resources to vanquish your foes, all while making sure that your actions don't cause instability to your patient, because he might end up rejecting you and severing connection. What I mean here is that the game is packed with all sorts of challenges and situations that require you to assess what's going on at all times. You have specific goals, but also overarching de facto winning and losing conditions that you have to keep an eye out for at all times. And the game does a phenomenal job at introducing new foes with new skills and new conditions for every encounter. I have not finished the game yet, but man, it is pretty brutal that the game never lets you sit on your laurels and repeat the winning formula from the last area. And this forces you to constantly think about how to overcome the challenge before you with your build. This game has Slayer, Seeker, and Survivor types of challenges, which is to say, situations in which it would be better to kill before you are killed, situations in which you need to figure out your opponent's weakness, and situations in which you just need to outlive your opponent. And your best shot at not failing miserably every mission is to properly identify the type of combat encounter that you're in. Fight in Tight Spaces, for example, is a card battler that requires you to painstakingly analyze every variable to take the most efficient decision for every turn. But you are limited by the possibilities of your initial deck and the cards that you pick up along the way. There is still a build aspect to it, and it's not bad. But in this game, you have this talent tree, which is like a neural network of enhancements, you have equipment, and you have the forge mechanic, which I am pretty sure is going to make a lot of you say,
Shut up and take my money!
Because it truly is the star of the show here. The forge allows you to craft your own skills by combining a form, which is essentially the tile or range of tiles that are affected by the skill, the effect, which is the skill itself, and the efficiency, which is a component that determines the AP cost, the cooldown time, and the power modifier. And there are different variants of these components that have lots of different modifiers that are tactically relevant. And this all translates into an almost endless spectrum of combinations and synergies for you to play the game your way. And when you decide the type of transponder that you want to be, and you make all these moving parts work in favor of said approach, the feeling of satisfaction is incomparable, I tell you. I'm a fucking noob and a slow learner to boot, but at the beginning of the game I had this healing skill that only affected the tile where my character was at, but later on in the game I found a bot form that worked like a totem of sorts. So I decided to break up my healing skill and build a new one with a totem and the most powerful but also slowest efficiency component. And I also decided to go for those skills in the talent tree that boosted my health. The result was an insanely resilient tanky character with free periodic healing that could outlive anyone and anything. And my preferred tactic, whenever it was possible, was to wait for enemies to come to me and wear them down to their deaths. But that's because But if you aren't a survivor, if you are the risk-taking fuck-all type of player, there's a slew of things that you can weave together to turn your character into a lean, mean, killing machine. Whatever you choose to do, know that this game will not let you get away with it without a challenge, because the damn thing is hard and punishing. These optional areas that I tell you about, for example, are quite the gamble. You can get more and better loot from them, and even a choice of an extra boon once you complete the area that you can take with you to the mandatory fight. And you can keep going deeper and collecting more and better bonuses, but you also risk getting your ass kicked before the mandatory fight. So combat areas have the thrill of the gamble factor, and I think it was very well implemented with these optional fights. If you liked Transistor's skill crafting mechanics, and if you thought that Tyranny's spellcrafting system was something that the RPG world was desperately needing, you are going to be over the moon with this game. But while this game has some of my favorite things amongst all the games on this list, it also unfortunately has some of the things I disliked the most. Like I said, the writing is sometimes crude, on the nose, and straight out amateurish. Gee, thank you, Doctor, for making it abundantly clear. Now I know the type of world that I'm in. But I am thankful that conversations are usually kept short and to the point, and that there aren't too many information dumps, so that's not much of a problem. The most annoying thing is perhaps how the game keeps introducing new mechanics and teaching you how to use them after you're like 4 hours into the fucking game. Fucking seriously? This reminds me of Circus Electrique, a game that was still throwing tutorials at you in the last third of the game. Wantless is a complicated game because the gameplay is complex, so there is no way around that, I suppose. It's as lean as it can be. But the game drowns you with mechanics and tutorials from the very beginning, and when it finally starts to ease up on the hand-holding, it throws a fuck ton of shit at you and expects you to deal with all of it simultaneously. The game isn't easy for sure, but the biggest challenge is to keep all the rules, conditions, buts, ifs, and whens in your brain's RAM memory. And I tell you, I used to be very good at this when I was younger, but the older I get, the less I care about remembering rules, conditions, buts, ifs, and whens. Also, if you are like me, you are probably not going to be thrilled with the fact that you can't customize the way your character looks, and that this is the default look that they went for. Oh, and also, this is what your trusty technician sidekick, the second most important character in the game so far, looks like. And then there is the fact that these guys received a public subvention. I'm not going to get into my thoughts on the matter because they fall well outside the scope of this video, but if you are a would-be customer, I think you should be informed about this. And if you are a French gamer and you like RPGs, my advice would be to go out and get this shit right now, because you helped fund it.
Thank you, dickheads!
And I'm pretty sure they didn't ask for your opinion, so you might as well benefit and get a really good game for a price that's lower than its actual market value, don't you think? Dragon Chronicles Black Tears.
What the fuck?
I'm sorry, what?
I know what you are thinking.
What the fuck, dude? Beyond Galaxyland and Drova didn't do it for you, but this mobile-looking, cheap, generic piece of dog shit did?
You suck!
Well, just let me explain imaginary strawman that I used to get my points across. First, it's not dog shit, okay? Is it generic? Well, yes. Does it give strong mobile game vibes? Again, yes. In fact, you can get it for your mobile as I understand it. I don't know about the mobile version though, but the PC version is a full-feature game, so there are no microtransactions or gems that you need to buy, none of that shit, okay? And it has a couple of things going for it that might just keep you entertained during those times in which you have nothing better to do, or when you're taking a break between the last 60-hour-long CRPG and the next. Or, you know, when you are multitasking or something. This game starts with the most generic and cliched introduction that you can imagine. I rolled my eyes so hard that I thought I was going to see my hypophyse, but then the game started and I thought, oh, this isn't so bad. Then I unlocked a couple of characters and eventually made it to my stronghold. And if this looks like a shameless ripoff of your stronghold in Darkest Dungeon, it's because it absolutely is. In fact, the game is discount Darkest Dungeon in most respects, I'm not gonna lie. The facilities you have at your disposal and the way in which you upgrade them is beyond simply being labeled Darkest Dungeon inspired. And the gameplay cycle is almost exactly the same. You even have a contamination mechanic, which feels a little bit like the stress mechanic in Darkest Dungeon, only without any of the personality or gravitas. The game's areas also work like the dungeons in Darkest Dungeon, and it also tries to generate a lingering feeling of risk and anguish like the one you got in Darkest Dungeon as you ventured forth deeper into its dungeons. But it fails miserably because it has too many safety nets, and it lacks many of the mechanics that make Darkest Dungeon feel dangerous and tense, like torches that get progressively consumed, mounting stress, limited inventory space, trapped or poisoned caches and bodies, etc. Dragon Chronicles Black Tears features what in my book are cheap imitations of some of these mechanics, and some others are just completely absent. And don't even get me started on the story and how it compares to the story in Darkest Dungeon, though it could have been much worse. Much worse, actually. Actually, the more you play the game, the better it gets, but I'm not even going to bother making a case for it. Then why, oh why, you may wonder, is this game even on this list? It's on this list, though very far behind the others, admittedly, because it does a couple of things that I happen to value very highly in games, and it does them in a way that I consider to be well beyond decent. First, you recruit a finite number of heroes. It's not an endless parade of disposable tactical assets like the ones you have in Darkest Dungeon or Circus Electrique. In those other games, you have a good number of classes that are very different from each other, and no two characters are the same, even if they are of the same class. Their progression possibilities are constrained by their classes, which means that two plague doctors or two escape artists, for example, will still be variants of the same class, and therefore not that much different from each other, even if you choose different skills and equip them with different items. And this makes them feel like they're disposable. Yes, the more they level, the more you care about them and the more you try to protect them, but they are still variants of a class. Your heroes in Dragon Chronicles, like the ones in Darkest Dungeon 2, are unique, which means that they have talents that are unique to them, and you even find runes that you can socket on them, some of which are even character specific. True, if they die, you can spend some resources to bring them back, and they'll be back in business in the next week, and this kind of cheapens the whole gravitas aspect of the game, but each of them brings something unique to the table. There are also interesting cross-character synergies, though the game thinks you're too dumb to figure them out yourself, so it points them out shamelessly when you're putting your party together. But it's the various facilities that you have at your disposal in your stronghold where the game truly shines. You have the storage facility where you keep all the artifacts that you collect throughout the game. Here you can change artifacts and unlock more equipment slots. What's good about this is that many artifacts synergize in surprisingly potent ways with some of your hero's talents. For example, if you're going to go for a party that focuses on bleed damage, you surely are going to take Lilith or Alphonse with you, but you might also want to take the artifact called Watcher's Claws if you've already found it. At the guild hall, you can invest some of your resources to upgrade your hero skills, and you'd do well to approach this process with a strategic mindset, because resources are scarce in this game and you don't want to waste them upgrading skills that aren't going to add much to your game plan. So for example, Exelion can be a pretty good tank, the best tank in the game in my opinion, but he has damage skills too. So if you want to use him as a tank, you might want to focus on upgrading his defensive skills and save the resources that you would use on his offensive skills to upgrade someone else, for example. You also have a divination hall, where you can equip your heroes with some of the runes that you find while you're out there exploring the game's dungeons. Where exactly do you socket these things? I think it's better not to know. The thing is that as it happens with talents, you want to use the right runes on the right characters. Some runes are specific to some characters, and as you might imagine, those are the most potent ones. You also have the library, where you can fiddle about with the party's talent tree. That's right, your heroes have a collective talent tree with skills that do various things and depend upon different attributes. And finally, the battle locations themselves are mini-maps like the area maps that you had in Darkest Dungeon 2. There are combat, elite combat, and non-combat nodes. Non-combat nodes can be loot or random events. There are also some story bits that you can unlock in some of the nodes. Combat itself lacks some of the most interesting moving parts that you have in Darkest Dungeon 2, or Circus Electrique. Position, for example, isn't a thing, and there are no environmental hazards nor any other location-dependent conditions. You do have them, technically, but they don't really amount to much. This is a generic copy of Darkest Dungeon, make no mistake about it, but it does have a moderately interesting spin. And it's much more casual, easier, and less stress-inducing. If you want a game in which you can tweak your build and then put it to the ultimate test, Wantless is definitely the game you want out of the ones on this list. But if you want a casual game with a gameplay cycle that is similar to Darkest Dungeon that still allows you to have control over your build, then I would say that you could do worse than Dragon Chronicles Black Tears. Plus, it goes for $8 in my region, which is a fair price for this title, considering it came out just this year. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. These are 4 RPGs that came out in the year 2024 that did do it for me. Or rather, that are doing it for me so far. They are all pretty different from each other, so hopefully you found something that piqued your interest. Let me know if you've been playing any recent good RPGs in the comment section down below. And if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.